Well, a controversial squad selection from Tony Popovic, to say the least. He's selected his 26-man Socceroos squad to take on Indonesia and China in some very critical World Cup qualifiers over the next week and a half. I'm joined by Christian Montegan and Poletti today to break down the team news. Christian, 10 new faces that we didn't see in the previous window. Obviously, that was back in November. A lot has changed, but fair to say a fair few selections out of the blue.
Yeah, so I saw Vince Rugari's tweet yesterday. He said, "Expect the unexpected," and sure enough,
Underselling
that's basically what happened and more. Yeah, quite a few new faces as you mentioned. Kai Truran being one, Triantis, Ryan Teague from Victory, and those are just midfielders, right? I know Truran can classify as like defensive midfield defender sort of type, but to have that many inexperienced bodies in the middle of the park, I think it's a slight concern. It's not like we're playing Japan and Saudi, but these are still extremely crucial games against Indonesia and China, where we know the table is just extremely tight. I mean, 1 point separating second and six. It's pretty crazy. So, like 6 out of 6 points here in this sort of window is just vital to really wrap up that second spot and go one step further. But yeah, some of these players we'll delve into, but yeah, a few shocks.
Well, let's start with the midfield then, since you bring it up. So what we've seen here, next to Triantis playing, from what we hear, very well over in Scotland for Hibernian, and Ryan Teague has been one of the best midfielders, if not the best player. I think he's leading the Alex Tobin at the moment as well, so in the A-League. So individually well-deserved call-ups, but you look at the makeup of that midfield, as you say, we've lost the likes of Aiden Hrustic, who's become a non-factor pretty much in Serie B. Keanu Bacchus has kind of dropped off. He was in the October window. We haven't seen him. Riley McGree has been injured as well. So we're left with kind of Jackson Irvine and Aidan O'Neill as the last two midfielders, that kind of Graham Arnold era that are still sticking around. Then we've got Triantis, Ryan Teague for their first call-ups, as well as Kai Truran, who can probably step up into midfield as well, of course, and Anthony Caceres, who, as most people have said, Poletti, has been long overdue a call-up, but that is still, as Christian said, 4 very fresh faces to pair with just 2 kind of experienced Socceroos in that midfield.
Yeah, and I also very much worry just on the sheer lack of midfielders selected. I know, as you said, a lot of it does come down to injury, but I mean, that's a lot of defenders and not a lot of midfielders. Like, are we expecting perhaps maybe 1 or 2 of the forwards to drop back? I know Tilio's played in midfield before. Or are we looking at a situation where, are we really looking at a back 5? And I mean a proper back 5 where it's not necessarily park the bus kind of stuff, but it's a back 5 and there's not going to be a lot of opportunities to get forward.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's what it says. I think it says that we are just playing that 2 in midfield, like Popovic has done in his, first 2-3 windows. I can't remember how many he's had now. He's had 3, right? Because China and Adelaide, yeah. But he's had that back 3 with the wing backs that are able to shift roles slightly depending on how aggressive or defensive you want to be in the game. And I think that's the shape of the team is what this squad lays out for me, Christian. But when we go to look at the defenders, obviously we know our centre-backs have been in a bit of trouble. Hayden Matthews and Harry Sutar, the latest injury since that November squad. Geordie Boss at left wing-back is also out as well, so that pretty much locks in Aziz Beige to start. But then you have a look at some of the names that are brought in to support those roles. Alex Grant, I'll be honest, I thought it was a little bit early for him coming back to Sydney FC. He's looked good, but I didn't think he was going to be selected in this squad. Popovic knows him, and he played for him under at Perth. Another thing with Jason Davidson as well, who's also in the squad for the first time in a little while. I remember we talked about this when Popper first came in and even selected his very first squad. A lot of the players were kind of new to the Socceroos setup, but they were very much known quantities to Tony himself, and I think that trend is following through here as well.
Yeah, I was about to mention the exact same thing. I mean, Jason Davidson, he performed really well for Perth when they were together, so I think for Popper, when he makes these team selections, it's not a case of necessarily, yes, they've got to deserve their spot, and he's said that over and over again, but at the same time, he needs to have that strong connection with them as well. And if he's seen that he's worked well with a player in the past, for example, Nishan Valupale, everyone criticised that decision, saying what's he done to deserve a call-up, then he scores in that same window just to sort of rub it in and Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's where Popper, I think, is coming from. And, from fans looking in, they're thinking, like, some of these selections don't make sense. Like, Jason Davidson has been in the squad for ages. But, yeah, like I said, for Popper, it's about he knows his players understand, especially his defensive structure. That's what he prides himself on, right? So, yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it's going to be a back five, especially for the games against China and Indonesia. But yeah, it's interesting to see these new faces. Even Karacic as well. We've seen, I think it was 2 windows ago, he called Karacic up, another player who he's fond of as well. So yeah, there's quite a few players in there, but I think overall, I think yes, you can question a couple of them, in the forward line as well, which we'll get to. But I think all in all, against Indonesia and China, this should be enough to at least get 4 points minimum.
Interesting on Fran Karacic. It's one that's really come out of left field. When is is it a couple of windows ago? I thought it was longer than that. Here you go. He hasn't played since 2022. I couldn't tell you exactly what squad he's been called up.
I was thinking of Milos Dejanek. Sorry.
Right. Okay. Dejanek has been. Yeah. He was in November. Yeah. But Fran Karacic, he's a player that, again, known to Popovic. Apparently, Tony was saying in the press conference, he's been given the captain's armband in Croatia at the club he's playing at. Apparently, he looked a better player. I'm not sure if we can speak to too much expertise on him, but he hasn't been a part of the Australian setup in a few years. So he's another wild card where you could have been looking at other more regular options closer to home, Poletti. But we'll go into this forward line because here I think there is a couple of very controversial picks. And Daniel Arzani, Popovic literally said in the press conference, I'm sure he wouldn't have expected it. And I think that's correct. I don't think Arzani would have. I don't think anyone outside of the Socceroos setup would have expected him to receive a call-up. Popovic was saying if he hadn't played well in the last few weeks, then he wouldn't have been selected. And to be honest, I'm trying to rack my brain to think of what exact performance he's talking about. He started on the weekend for the first time in a while and did all right. But before that, I thought he was largely ineffective coming off the bench for Melbourne Victory.
It's an incredibly weird one when you look at it and you break it down with Arzani. Look, we've well established already that Popovic likes to go after the known quantity players, right? And Arzani is someone he knows quite well. But at what point do you have to question whether that logic is the right one to be using? Look, Arzani could come out in this window, score 3 goals, and all of a sudden we're going, oh, Popper, he's a genius. We never doubted him. Sort of vibe. Sort of like what we did with Nishan Volupele when, he comes on, he scores against China, still the victory for the Socceroos. But at the same time, could we also end up seeing the Arzani that we've all come to know, where sluggish, lethargic, isn't, making the runs, and Popper might realise halfway through, oh, I've made a mistake and I need to hook him, which could change the game plan entirely. And we know that Popper isn't afraid to hook players off or drop them to the bench if, they're not performing up to his incredibly high standards. I recall a story once upon a time where there was a defender working under Popovic at the Wanderers who came in. He either didn't track back or something, or he came in a little bit overweight and was basically told, you need to do this, or you won't be selected. And then got dropped and had to put in the work to earn his spot back. And that's what Popper is like. So it does raise a lot of interesting questions here, and I hope that Arzani performs, because I want to see everyone who was selected for the national team perform. But, there's just that question lingering there of, can Arzani do it? Like, if there's anyone who can get the best out of Arzani, it's Popovic, and we have seen that. But it's also, these are very lofty expectations, and this is such a crucial window. Is this really a time when, you can afford to be quote-unquote experimenting with such a call-up who is very hit or very miss?
Yeah, it's an interesting point you touch on. I think with Arzani, more than most players that I'm aware of in football, he seems to be extremely sensitive, Christian, to the coach that he is playing under at any given time. He was a magnificent player last year under Tony Popovic. even with the conflicts he had with Patrick Kisnorbo at the start of this season, I think he was a better player under PK than he has been under Arthur Dillis. And I think that goes largely down to the management style and the demands that the coach puts on him as a player. And, maybe he will come out in this window and be a Daniel Arzani under Tony Popovic compared to the Daniel Arzani that we've seen under Arthur Dillis in the A-League the last few months.
Perhaps. I mean, obviously players, they operate and perform differently under different coaches, right? And if he's playing under Popovic, we've known in the past, especially last season, where he really showed, I thought, his best self for most of that season. And okay, this is the Arzani we know. So obviously I don't expect him to start in these next 2 games for the Socceroos, but it's that option coming off from the bench, right? But I guess the argument on the opposite side is to say, in terms of like fitness, he hasn't played much in terms of consistent 90-minute football. In terms of the momentum, he hasn't got that at the moment in his legs. So like, what kind of impact can he actually make on this side? I think that's the big question going into these next 2 games. Talent-wise, he definitely has it, right? I mean, he's one of those players who I think can get away with having a few bad performances and he will still get into the squad based on his talent alone. And that's weird from Popovic because he's not about that, right? Like, you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't work, if you don't track back, if you don't defend, and you're not going to be in the team. So that's where Arzani, I feel as though he's that outlier, the exception where he's got a bit more time to prove his worth, but I think it is running out of time for him. When he gets back from international duty, he's got to start performing. Otherwise, if he gets selected again and is still producing the same performances, then real questions start to begin for Pop as to why are you picking the same players when they're not performing, and other players have been, whether it be domestically or overseas, and they're not getting a look in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple other forwards that have been, re-included in the squad after a little bit of time away. Marco Tilio, personally, I don't think that's controversial at all. I think he's been outstanding since he's come back from injury for Melbourne City. I think he deserves his recall. Adam Taggart, I'm a little bit leaning the other way. I know he's had a pretty good month or 2 recently, scoring some goals in a Perth Glory side that it's been hard to come by. But the truth is that, despite the whole narrative of doing the best with what he can, the fact is that football isn't really fair like that. And, he hasn't had the season that some other strikers had. We look at a guy like Noah Botic. If you're really looking to switch up player profiles, you look at Yengi and Noah Botic, well, then that's actually a pretty diverse skill set if you're going to take 2 strikers compared to what Yengi and Adam Taggart offer. So I think Noah Botic is extremely stiff to miss out. Max Ballard in midfield, Popovic said he was probably right on the edge and a bit unlucky. The obvious comparisons are going to be made between Daniel Arzani and Nestori Irankunda Poletti. It's maybe not as simple as picking one over the other because, Irankunda was player of the month in February or January or something for Grasshoppers after he went out on loan. He's clearly been playing some good football compared to what Daniel has been doing. Maybe it's another situation of leaving him in Switzerland. I don't know how much you buy that kind of narrative. Let him kind of settle and develop as a pro footballer. I think we've kind of left that a little bit behind now, but his absence from the national team is very clear to see as well.
It is very clear to see, and having had a brief look at the live chat on the YouTube stream of the press conference, it was very clear that fan sentiment around Irankunda's lack of inclusion. None of them were mincing words. Let's put it that way. in terms of their thoughts, and I think that is echoed by a lot of fans who just want to see Irankunda back in the national team. So yeah, look, I want to see Irankunda as much as everyone else, but I don't. I understand why he might not have been selected for this window.
Should he be in right now, Christian?
I just think it's a big concern not to have him in the squad at this point with the World Cup coming up if we do qualify, right? Because just say, he plays well for the next few months leading into the 2026 World Cup and then you bring him in again. It's like, I just feel as though he hasn't had that consistency that he should with the national team. And he's such, for me, in the final third, a really important player, out wide. He can sort of divert into the middle as well. It's just talented, right? You need to embed these talents into the squad, whether it be, okay, it's fine if you don't agree that he should be starting or playing as many minutes, but at least have him in the squad. I just don't see how that would hurt his development, or some of these suggestions that have popped up as to why he hasn't been selected. I always think it's a strange one. I really do. Because, we've said time and time again, this is sort of a generational talent that we have in our hands. And yeah, it's just weird. Like, if you want that consistency leading into a World Cup, you need to have players like that in your squad. And for me, yes, he has moved around a couple of places. He's in Switzerland now, but at the same time, just get him in. I just don't see why not.
Yeah, I'm with you. One for me. I think Nesta should be in the squad, especially looking forward to the World Cup in 2026. All right, that's going to do for today. Appreciate you tuning in. Remember, we're going to be doing live watch-alongs for both of these fixtures in the upcoming international window. If you want to hear more conversation about the upcoming FIFA international window for the Socceroos and the games against Indonesia and China, some massively important fixtures in an AFC World Cup qualifying group that gets tighter and crazier by the match day, head over to the latest episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. It's out now for a bit more of an in-depth conversation about the window ahead. But thank you for watching today, and we'll see you later.